up on the world today. UK Prime Minister says London is sending 4 fighter jets to Qatar to strengthen its defensive operations. He also confirms takeoff of first repatriation flight from the Middle East. Iran's military targets headquarters of Kurdish forces in northern Iraq. And millions of Nepalis vote today in the country's first general election since the youth-led protest toppled the government last September. Welcome everyone to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin in the UK, where Prime Minister Keir Starmer says his country is sending 4 fighter jets to Qatar to strengthen the UK's defensive operations there as the US-Israeli strikes on Iran continue. Speaking at a press conference at Downing Street, the Prime Minister confirmed the takeoff of the UK's first repatriation flight to bring dozens of citizens home from the Middle East. Earlier, a passenger on board the flight in Oman said there was a delay. It was supposed to leave the Middle East on Wednesday, but couldn't due to a technical issue. He also set out in some detail the planning the UK had been doing in recent months and what he wanted to characterize his calm, level-headed leadership. But he did not rule out the role UK may play in the conflict's future. He also sought to set out the scale of the logistical challenge and helping Britons in the Gulf. Israel says its strikes have hit Beirut and threatened Iranian officials in Lebanon. According to Iranian media, the death toll from 5 days of attacks has risen to 1,045, with more than 600 people injured. In the meantime, the UAE says it has intercepted 6 Iranian missiles and 131 drones today. Across the region, explosions were reported in Qatar and Bahrain. Well, 6 days into the war, a united front has begun to emerge among key NATO allies in Europe as more EU leaders come forward with promises of defense aid to Cyprus and allies in the Gulf. 2 days ago, Greece, the UK and France said they were sending ships and air defenses to Cyprus after drones were fired at the RAF base at Akrotiri on the island. Now they have been joined by Italy and Spain, and the Netherlands is considering aid too. There was an initial reluctance to get involved in Italy, and especially in Spain, which has refused to allow the United States to use shared air bases at Moron and Rota to attack Iran. Spain's defense minister said the frigate Cristobal Colon was joining its allies to show commitment to the defense of the European Union and its eastern border. And that's a very different message from France, which has just agreed to authorize US warplanes to use its bases temporarily, though, because they provide protection for their partners in the Gulf. However, Iran's military says it has targeted the headquarters of Iranian Kurdish forces in northern Iraq, stepping up strikes on Kurdish regions in both Iran and Iraq. According to the military, it attacked Kurdish groups opposed to the Islamic Revolution in Iraqi's Kurdistan area with 3 missiles. Tehran is intensifying its attacks on Iranian Kurdish groups in Iraq amid reports that US President Donald Trump wants them to join the fight against Iran as US and Israeli assaults continue. Kurdish Iranian opposition parties in Iraq have denied reports that some of their forces have crossed into Iran. And over in the United States, where a bipartisan resolution aimed at limiting President Donald Trump's ability to wage war in Iran has failed in the Congress as the strikes continue in the Middle East. The war powers measures was rejected in a 53-47 vote, largely along party lines. Democrats argued that President Trump had sidelined Congress and offered shifting reasons for the war. Most Republicans blocked the resolution, but some said they could change course if the war expands in the coming weeks. The US and Israel began striking Iran on Saturday, and the Islamic Republic has responded in retaliatory attacks on Israel and US allied states in the Gulf. Now let's bring in former Minister Counselor in the Embassy of Nigeria in Tehran, Ambassador Ogwole Amedode. Thank you for joining us. He joins us from our Abuja studios. A pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Right, your thoughts about this rise in tensions in the Middle East after that strike by the United States and Israel on Iran and Tehran's retaliatory attacks, which has now expanded into day 6?
Yeah, well, the Middle East, for two main reasons, has always been a zone of intense interest. The first is because all of the three Abrahamic religions have their roots, have their origins in that region. And in that order, I mean Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For the second reason, the fact that when the internal combustion engine was invented, ICE, which has a reliance on fossil energy, and the discovery therefrom of large deposits of crude oil in that region, accentuated the interest of the Middle East, or in the Middle East, for the global society. So for these two reasons, the Middle East has always been a zone of interest and a very combustible zone. So it's not surprising, given the dynamics of global politics, that this is happening now.
Right, and how do you see this playing out? The United States wants its allies to join in this war. Of course, after hitting Iran, Iran had retaliatory attacks on U.S. bases in countries in the Gulf. Ultimately, a lot of people believe that it was the U.S.'s way of trying to draw its allies into this war. How much of involvement do you think the Gulf states, and of course other allies of the United States, like the UK and the EU countries that are now trying to offer their services, how much involvement do you think is going to happen?
Well, to answer that question, I think we have to look at the dynamics of the emerging world order, the new realities. And what are the new realities? With the advent of Donald Trump 2.0, because his first term was our term 1.0, Trump 2.0 has always laid emphasis on the fact that, one, make America great again, MAGA, MAGA, and America first. And those twin doctrines saw him paying little attention to the transatlantic alliance of the North Atlantic Treaties Organization. He had began pushing that alliance partners begin to pay more attention and pay more if they want the United States of America's coverage, defense coverage. And he has been going about it almost unilaterally, and that hasn't been going down well. He has not spared any one of them. So with the breakout of kinetics in the Middle East, that is the combined attack of the United States and Israel on the Islamic Republic of Iran beginning on the 28th of February, most, if not all, of the NATO partners have been looking askance. In the last couple of hours, or maybe in the last one day, there has been a lackluster approach to it on the part of alliance partners. Like we're hearing now, the UK government wants to send 4 fighter jets in order to beef up the defense of its Gulf ally, Qatar. But again, if you look at it critically, they're not going on the umbrella of NATO alliance. No. They are bolstering defense for their Middle Eastern partners. And that is what I think is happening. what that says loud and clear is that the approach that Donald Trump has adopted over the last 1 year or so is seen to the fact that NATO is not as what it used to be. And this attack is almost unilateral because other skirmishes, other outings in the Middle East have always been a question of mobilizing NATO or getting, pushing through United Nations Security Council policy or decision in order to attack. But this time now, it's a question of going roughshod with its Middle Eastern partner, that is Israel, in order to attack the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And you served in Iran as ambassador for a couple of years. Iran's retaliatory attack, how do you see that? Is that all Iran has to give, or do you think the country is holding back, especially after the death of its supreme leader?
First of all, I didn't serve in Iran as ambassador.
Sorry.
I served as a regular foreign service officer at the rank of Minister Council.
Minister Councilor, rather.
Foreign service officer. Yeah, good. I wouldn't know the situation we have on hand. We can only put up some conjectures. You know, you cannot say outrightly, precisely what the situation is in terms of Iran's capabilities and capacities in terms of kinetic engagements. But what I do know is if you look at the international situation, what are the other interests there? The world has been shifting gradually, very gradually, inexorably, from a unipolar world with the United States sitting at the top of it all, the hegemon, away to a multipolar world with different centers. This is what other countries are clamoring for, Russia, China, and stuff. So what are the interests there? I like to take a perspective that most people do not want to look at and all that. I see the incursion, the attacks on the Islamic Republic of Iran by the United States as a continuation of wanting to undermine or control world supply, global supply of fossil fuel. Okay, if that is the case, who are likely the targets? The target here will be China. And will China fold its hands? Perhaps no, perhaps yes. But what I see is that there will be under the table support, even if it is moral support, for the Islamic Republic of Iran by countries like China, ditto for Russia. And if that goes on, and if that comes to be, and which I suspect it is, then it means that they are going to be able to do some things to bolster the Iranian defense systems. But that is not discountenancing the fact that Iran has also its domestic capacity for manufacturing, design and manufacture of sophisticated weapons, missiles and missile systems and stuff. So I don't think they should be underestimated, as it were, especially if the war is going to prolong beyond weeks into months.
Right, and I wonder how long it will prolong for. That is, if other, accompanying allies do not continue it for the United States, as the U.S. Congress has, voted to limit how much more U.S. President Donald Trump can actually order attacks on Iran. Be that as it may, do you think that would, limit the amount of attacks that will go into Iran, or begin to allow us to see an end to this war as it's ongoing?
Well, normally, before nations go into war, they prepare for it. Especially this one has been speculated for quite a while, that a war between the United States and Iran was a matter of when, not if. So hopefully they had prepared for it, but war supplies, putting a country and a national economy under a war footing isn't a stroll in the park, and sustaining it is even a worst case scenario. It's not a stroll in the park, it's a marathon in the desert, especially if it begins to stretch from weeks into months, as it were. I mean, the Ukrainian outing by Russia is one at hand. People thought that within a few weeks or a couple of months, it was going to be a campaign that will come to an end, but here we are now, running into years. I just hope this might not be it, but if it comes to play out that way, then it's a question of wanting to weigh out and bleed, who will bleed each other more. And what Iran is doing now is attacking American interests within its neighborhood, which is within the Gulf Cooperation countries, members, which is the GCC. And if that continues, then it's taking a wider toll, a wider ambience into it, and nobody knows how it's going to play out. Yes, it is easy to start a war, but nobody can predict how it's going to end.
Right. I was going to come to that even if this war does end, is America that attacked, first, and Israel joined in this attack. But other fires have been lit across the region, and be that as it may, there are other countries that, had been at loggerheads, with each other even before this, and then this created an opportunity to fight each other. So if this war does end between the US, Israel, and Iran, what about these other fires that have been lit? How do we put it out?
Well, I do know that in most cases, except where there is outright victory, then the victor will impose an armistice, in terms of surrender on the losing side. But if that's not the case, then eventually it's going to end up on the negotiating table. And if that's the case, then all issues that border on concerns by countries in the Middle East, the core countries and all, will come into play. I do know that Iran will be relentless in order to safeguard his territorial integrity. They are quite nationalistic when it comes to that. Don't forget that immediately after the success of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran went into war with Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and that war lasted for 8 years for a country emerging out of the tumultuous revolution and going straight into an international war, and it was not brought to its knees. It speaks loudly to what is on footing. But however, I guess what they may be aiming at is to whittle down Iran's military capacity in order to also push it to the negotiating table, or as it were, an outright regime change. Whether that's going to work out, I wouldn't know. However, Iran will also and is expanding the areas of conflict to American interests within the region in order to be able to attract more attention and maybe occupy a vantage position when once negotiations begin.
Right. I must thank you again for your time, Ambassador Bole Ahmed-Rodi. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me on your program.
And still to come on The World Today. More on the Middle East crisis. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirms takeoff of the first UK government-sponsored flight from the troubled region. Welcome back. The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has confirmed the takeoff of the UK's first repatriation flight to bring citizens home from the Middle East. Earlier, a passenger on board the flight in Oman said there was a delay and it was supposed to leave the Middle East on Wednesday, but couldn't due to a technical issue. That flight has now taken off and is expected to land later on today. More flights are expected to leave the Middle East with UK nationals as the fighting in the Middle East continues and countries race to bring home their nationals. Well, UN's human rights spokesperson Ravina Shamsundani has called on all parties to exercise maximum restraint to prevent further escalation and take all feasible measures to protect civilians, including foreign nationals, as well as critical infrastructure. She also said parties to the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran should return to the negotiating table, which is the one and only way to bring an end to the killing, destruction and despair. The High Commissioner is also calling for a prompt, impartial and thorough investigation into the circumstances behind the attack. Reports say there have been civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure and significant redisplacement as a result of the Israeli strikes in the south of the country and southern suburbs of Beirut.
The fear, the panic, the anxiety experienced by millions of people in the Middle East and beyond is palpable and was entirely avoidable. The situation is worsening and widening by the hour, playing out our worst fears. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk says he is deeply shocked by the impacts of the widespread hostilities on civilians and civilian infrastructure since the conflict erupted on Saturday with Israel and the United States of America's attacks on Iran. Iran's response against states across the region, as well as Hezbollah's subsequent entry into the conflict. The laws of war are crystal clear. Civilians and civilian objects are protected. All states and armed groups must abide by these laws. So far, besides Iran and Israel, the hostilities have impacted 12 other states, destroying or damaging private homes, offices and businesses, airports, energy infrastructure, among other civilian infrastructure. In the single deadliest and devastating incident, dozens of girls were reportedly killed and injured when their primary school in Minab, in the south of the country, was struck during the school day. I mean, children, little girls, in the middle of the school day, at the beginning of the school day, being killed in this manner, backpacks with, blood stains on them. This is absolutely horrific. And I think if there's any image that captures the essence of the destruction, despair, and senselessness and cruelty of this conflict, those are the images. The Iranian military has responded to the US and Israel attacks, deploying hundreds of missiles and drones, among other weapon systems, against states across the region, killing civilians and causing damage to civilian infrastructure. In the central Israeli city of Bet Shemesh, 9 people were killed when a missile struck a residential area. We're also gravely concerned by the escalation of hostilities in Lebanon after Hezbollah fired barrages of projectiles into Israel and the heavy counterstrikes of Israel, including in Beirut. We urge both parties to immediately end this major escalation in violence and to return to the agreed ceasefire. Across Iran, we have grave concerns for the welfare of the population, given the government's record of cracking down with lethal force on broad scale against those who oppose their rule, and the new threats of senior officials against any expression of dissent at this time. Human rights must not be instrumentalized or used as a bargaining chip by any state. We know from painful history what the results of the use of brute external force can mean for human rights. Human rights need to be central to Iran's future.
Away from the crisis in the Middle East, let's head to Asia, where millions of Nepalese have been voting in the country's first general election since violent youth-led protests toppled the government last September. Nearly 19 million people, including almost 1 million first-time voters, were registered to take part in the March 5th ballot for the House of Representatives. The Election Commission, speaking shortly after polls closed, said it expected voter turnout to be around 60%. The voting exercise was reported to be largely peaceful, with a huge security presence across the country. Corruption, economic stagnation and inequality are the main issues facing the country. These sparked the uprising in which 77 people died, many of them protesters shot by the police. The election represents a crossroads for Nepal, pitting the establishment against a new generation of politicians advocating for angry young Gen Z voters hungry for change. And that's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.